oh, my thighs. As you may know, stance is one of the most important things in archery. It's taught as a fundamental and it's the foundation of the shot. Now, most people learn to stand side on using a square stance. 1 foot on either side of the shooting line, roughly shoulder width apart, giving you lots of stability. Over time, people may choose to be more open in their stance, hence gaining a bit more stability, and that's how most people end up shooting. That said, people who are self-taught or come in with an untrained mind sometimes may adopt unconventional stances. And one of the things I've seen a few times, both in person and online, is the idea of using a half crouch as a stance. They'll shoot like this, with their knees bent, their weight balanced, of course, but a very wide stance, half crouched or crouched, and shooting from this position. And you can do so. There's nothing wrong with this. It's not a dysfunctional stance. But often, and I've seen people say this, it gives them a false sense of stability. So let's break down why the crouch doesn't work very well in archery. There are two elements of stance which we'll break down. The first is how far apart the feet are. The second is how bent the knees are. Now, the example which I'm talking about, which I saw, and I was coaching someone out of this, was a very open stance, like this, and he was kind of bending his legs down. So it's a very aggressive stance. This kind of stance is not uncommon or abnormal in other contexts. So the learner who I was supervising naturally adopted this stance without any instruction. So when I asked him why he did so, he told me it was to be more stable. Now, this is someone who wasn't trained in archery, so I was a little skeptical. So I wanted to find out a bit more about where he was coming from. And his background, not surprisingly, was martial arts and shooting. So in these contexts, this kind of stance would make some sense. This sort of stance makes sense in martial arts, not necessarily because it's stable, but because it's versatile. You use the stance as a go-to stance when you expect someone to attack you or some resistance. If someone comes at you, then you have the ability to react in many ways. You can guard high, you can guard low, you can sidestep, you can advance, you can retreat. All these things are based on this stance. If you punch, you can punch forward, advance. If you want to go backwards, you can skip back, you can sidestep, and so on. It's a very useful stance for most martial arts systems. So it wouldn't be surprising if someone who is trained in martial arts will adopt a stance like this. Similarly, this may be adopted in some variation for firearm shooting, especially for practical shooting purposes. You often see people shooting pistols in military or security who do have a slightly bent stance so they can move forward and maintain stability with their firearm. And while you may be drilled to believe that these stances are stable, they are stable only for that purpose and that context. This is actually not the most stable position. Someone who is in a practical shooting scenario may adopt a very open stance. But when you look at sport shooters, air rifle shooters, they don't stand like this. They stand like this. Why? Because you're taking the load off your muscles and putting it on your skeletal structure. With marksmanship events, shooting, archery, the sport variation is as much about endurance and stamina as it is about accuracy. The practical side of movement and resistance and stability are less important. The open stance, especially with the bent knees, is there to give you the best reaction. It's stable, yes, but it's stable in the context where if you have to expect a punch or you have to move around with a gun, it gives you a lot of mobility for this position. But it's all based on your muscles. So your thighs are constantly under strain. And that is a big problem in archery. If you are doing this all the time, sure, you can shoot, but you are putting far more strain on your hips, on your thighs, than you need to. If you're shooting, especially in a target environment where all you do is stand on a shooting line, the most stable position is when your body is at rest. When you're standing upright with your feet shoulder width apart, this is the least amount of effort to maintain a steady shooting platform. There is no argument here. What is easier, standing straight or crouching like this? And I'm not saying that you should never shoot from a crouched position, from whatever variation you want. What I'm saying is that this is the less stable option. You do it when you have to do it, but not something you would choose to do if you have the option to shoot from a standing position. In the end, while this may look really cool in an action kind of way, it isn't the most practical way to shoot. Yes, you can shoot like this, but why would you want to? The most stable stance isn't the one where you feel like you're the most stable. A stable stance is when you are doing the least amount of work. Hence, simplify your stance. Straight, steady, and relaxed. Remember that your archery session could take hours, and doing this consistently over 2, 3, or more hours is much more enjoyable and much more stable than having to crouch like this for 2 or 3 hours. You'll get tired, you'll get fatigued, you'll get grumpy. You'll get tired for no reason. So remember, in archery, the best stances, the most stable stances, are very much like how you would stand normally. Feet shoulder width apart and relaxed. Either square stance in line with the target or slightly open. Anyway, this is NUSensei. I hope you found this helpful. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.